But what I want to play in is the people who have finally decided to choose and use their voice and invested in the wrong person. To those people, I want to say, my darlings, please don't stop using your voice. Find another person. I guarantee you will ultimately find the person. And I know it's hard to repeat your story. Don't let that silence be the last time you use your voice. That comes back to owning our responsibility and our healing. That comes back to helping people find the right words.
Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SASS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SASS podcast. This is episode 100. Which is quite a milestone for a podcast. I want to commemorate the occasion by noting how far this podcast has come since I launched on Friday, November 4th, 2022. I've hosted 60 guests, some of them numerous times, and have done 3 solo episodes on educational topics. I've also had multiple guests during one episode, including a men's survivors episode with 3 guests and myself telling our sexual assault stories and talking about the complexities of male healing. But I think the biggest accomplishment of this podcast is the growth that Sexual Assault Survivor Stories has experienced, going from approximately 50 listeners when I started to close to 4,000 listeners now. And I owe it to you, my audience. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate your loyalty and tuning in each week, and I'm tremendously grateful for those of you who've shared this podcast with family, friends, coworkers, and people you don't even know. Sharing this podcast has had a phenomenal impact on its growth, so thank you. I wouldn't still be here if it wasn't for each and every one of you. Happy 100th episode, everyone. This week, Carolyn Markel is back as our monthly guest, sharing her insights and healing wisdom. Carolyn is the founder and CEO of Safe in Harm's Way, a virtual safe place and online resource for victims and survivors of interpersonal violence to find all things necessary to escape a dangerous living situation or an abusive significant other. Our discussion this month centers on the ups and downs of the healing path, as well as taking responsibility for our own healing journey and responses to past trauma. I know that everyone who tunes in this week will gain some excellent insights and knowledge. Thanks again for joining me for this 100th episode. Here's Carolyn. I am so glad that you're back. I'm ready to get caught up with what's going on with Carolyn and Safe in Harm's Way and all things good. Carolyn's going to introduce the topic. I'm really anxious to hear what we're going to do tonight.
Lots of big feelings and lots of going backwards into people or situations that really didn't serve you. And even the need to scratch that itch to reconnect with those people and to put yourself back in situations. As humans, we have the propensity to ebb and flow in our own lives. And that, for me, always relates back to the healing journey. Whether you're a survivor of sexual assault, or whether you're a survivor of childhood trauma, or whether you're a survivor of a narcissistic parent, or a narcissistic partner, or a narcissistic family, or you were the scapegoat, or you were the black sheep. We all function in the same format of healing. And that format is healing is not linear. So it's going to go forward and back. It's going to go to the side. It's going to stall. It's going to speed forward. We don't know which direction it's going to go. It is our responsibility to do 2 things: to own our own energy, to really sit in our body and what our body's feeling. The second part is to own the part and the role we played in all of it. I'm going to stop there, Dave, and say, what scares you about those 2 things? As a listener, what would scare you if I said those 2 things? The first one is that healing is not linear, and it's going to be all over the place for your lifetime.
That doesn't scare me as a listener, because I think that is a commonality in life itself. But when it comes to thinking about healing, I don't expect it to be linear, because I know that, as you just said, life ebbs and flows. And so sometimes things are great and you really feel like you're on a healing upswing. And then sometimes because of life circumstances, moods, hormones, thought processes, everything crashes. So I think that applies to everything very strongly in the healing process. And then what was the second one?
The second part is, in the trauma that we experience, we all play a role in it. What scares you about that?
That is much more scary. The reason that scares me is because that lays a lot of responsibility at our own feet. We have to acknowledge that much of what we are experiencing in our life, we have a big role in. It doesn't feel like it sometimes, but we can dictate what our thought processes are and what our outlook is going to be. It's just hard to realize that and to embody that and manifest that. And so that's where the fear comes in for me, is recognizing my power in manifesting what you just said, that we all play a role in that. We play a role in our healing. We play a role in how we help others. We play a role in how we affect others. So yeah, that's kind of overwhelming and fear-inducing.
Yeah, and that's really why I want to talk about it today, because I know in all the work I've done in my own journey, you stated it so perfectly of healing not being linear. Most people who've been doing this work long enough or work in advocacy get that. The good reminders for everybody to know, if you've had 762 great days in a row and you have a weekend where you end up in bed and life just seems too big, that's normal. And that's what I want people to hear, because in the healing journey, there's going to be times when your body remembers something that your brain hasn't processed yet. And so you're going to feel tired. You're going to feel stressed. You're going to feel like you're screaming at people. You're going to feel, I'm not eating right. I just ate an entire bag of jalapeno crunchers. I also drove through the Taco Bell. And we start to beat ourselves up for that. And then sometime after that, your brain catches up to your body and says, oh, well, it was the anniversary of this thing. Or it was a memory that came up on Facebook of that thing. It's okay to give ourselves the biggest amount of grace. I had someone say to me this week, I really wish that you could extend the kindness and consideration that you give so easily to other people to yourself. Oh, that kind of hurt. We all have the opportunity to extend to ourselves the greatest amount of consideration and kindness to other people. And we forget that. If I could take out marching band and fireworks around, that would be, hey, everybody, listen. Remember that even if you know that healing isn't linear, remember to give yourself the grace, because it's so easily forgotten. And that's a really big part of the journey for anyone who's navigated any kind of difficulty, is to remember that you're not doing it wrong if you have a bad day. You're not doing it wrong if you suddenly want to take, 5 naps. You're not doing it wrong if suddenly there's rage against whoever perpetrated the crimes against you and also claim to love you at the same time. I just want to highlight that, because that actually leads into the second part, which is our responsibility to understand the role that we played.
For me, and so if it's for me, it's probably for a lot of my listeners who heard what you just said about healing not being linear. Those bad days, when they come along, I can grant myself all kinds of grace. I can say to myself, yeah, this is normal. I've heard that millions of times. I know that there's going to be bad days, but it's hard for me to navigate those bad days because I still have responsibilities. I can't lay in bed for 2 or 3 days. I can't take 5 naps in the day. And I know some people do and can, and then feel guilty about it. And like you said, they shouldn't, because that happens, and you should give yourself that grace and say that it's okay. I need to take those 5 naps. But for those of us who feel a tremendous amount of responsibility and ownership of a product that needs to get out there, it's impossible, or next to impossible, to take that time off and grant myself that grace. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but let me challenge you. On what point in having to get done do you push yourself beyond capacity as the one responsible for this, and it has to be done, versus going, are there any things I can rearrange and tasks that can wait? Because in my mind, well, I now have to stay up until 3:30 a.m. What in that hierarchy of things allows for you to get the most important thing accomplished, and then look at the subset and even reloop with people and say, can I extend the timeline on this until this day? Is it possible for us to have a conversation on this a little bit later? Hey, my schedule changed. Can we move this up? Can we move it back? Can we move it to a different day? At what point, and I'm sure you'll be answering this and I'll be discussing it for the same people who need to hear it, because if we are talking about it, to your point, everybody has these moments. What part of that journey is a trauma response to, in order to prove my worth, in order to prove my value, I have to get all of it done, not just what I designate as the most important deliverable and priority for me or my business or those people I serve.
Guilty as pointed out. I think I fit that category of, because of my trauma, because of the way I was raised, because of being a third child, because of all the reasons why I fit into that category. On top of which, I'm a horrible procrastinator and I'm a terrible organizer. So you put that into the mix of somebody who needs to heal and somebody who needs to take some time and take a breath. Then I feel guilty, even though I know I shouldn't. Yeah, all of those negativities come into play, and it feeds the trauma.
Yes. I'm glad that you brought up this perspective, because if I talk about, taking naps and all this, there's going to be a lot of people like, who are you? What kind of trust fund do you have? Turns out I don't have one. But what I'm saying is, on the downtime that you could honor your body to slow down, or the pause that says my worth and my value is in me, regardless of the commitments I have made, that I can shuffle. And guess what? If I shuffle these priorities and still deliver on the thing that's most important, I am still valued, I am still lovable, and I still deserve and should be demanding the respect that comes from my knowledge, my skill, and ability. And I'm going to pivot on these things, because if we're extending grace to ourselves the same way we extend to others, if we got an email that said, hey, I've overloaded on XYZ, can we pivot? We would say, by all means, yes. And if we got the email or the text that said, hey, I'm expecting this deliverable to you, I know it was due at 10 p.m. I'm going to get it to you by 15 p.m. And you know that that's not really going to compromise the overall thing, but you've given yourself now an hour and 15 minutes. Would you ever say to somebody, I told you 10 p.m., you're done? And people do have to deal with others like that, which is why we have to prioritize who are the people we're delivering to and what do we know of them. And that's part of the priority process. All of it, how we have to deliver and how we have to show up. When we are high functioning and when we do it consistently, we can prioritize and demand of ourselves and know that the rest will fall into place.
I'm really right on board with that. What do you say to those people whose trauma is so severe that getting back out of bed and getting back on track feels almost impossible or impossible? Like, the trauma has caused so much interruption in life that normal functioning doesn't seem possible, doesn't seem realistic. They see other people functioning in ways that they consider normal, but they can't produce. They're just way, way, way injured.
I'm glad you brought it up, because all of us have had those moments. When I went back and decided to get my trauma certification to better understand my own body's reaction, but also in the people I serve, the realization that sometimes that feeling is so heavy, it's impossible to get out of bed. And this is where I want to reiterate, I am not victim blaming. I am not saying, get up, sister, get over it. That's not it. Mm-hmm. What I am saying is we have a responsibility in that part of our healing to say, what is one thing I can do right now that would make it better in the next 5 minutes? My go-to is nothing heroic. My go-to is get up, drink a big old glass of ice water that has more ice, and the only water you're putting in is to fill the cracks between the ice. And if you think that one was enough, I'm telling you 20 is more like it. That recalibrates your body into the ability to make the next right decision. Chew gum, that also calibrates the nerve that runs from the top of your head to the tips of your toes and allows your body to suddenly make the next right decision. And maybe that right decision comes within 5 minutes. Maybe that next right decision comes in an hour. But we have a responsibility to say, we can do one thing right now. And then decide in an hour, I'm going to do one thing. And then an hour after that, I'm going to do one thing. And if it's so bad, then the one thing might be calling the 988 number for suicide help to talk to somebody about it. It might be calling a friend and actually having the words come out of your mouth that says, I am struggling and in such a deep, dark place. I don't know what to do. Or it's having built, I called it my 8 smartest people. I had a group of 8 people that were on my phone speed dial that I could call and say the deepest, darkest thing, and they would still love me. And their direction, because we had worked out before, was to tell me one thing to do. And my choice within those 8 people was not to question what they had asked me to do, because we had decided in advance what it was. They had an option to choose of the things that we're going to tell Carolyn when she calls. If I, in my internal voice, said, they don't get me, they don't understand, how dare they ask me, I had to make the choice that I was going to follow what they told me to do. So you have to choose your 8 people carefully. I have a child that this child always would circle me when there was a problem and never be able to really voice what that problem was. And about 7 to 10 days after just being my shadow, this child would finally say to me, I'm having a problem. So I worked out with this child to say, you don't have to say I'm having a problem. What's a code word or phrase we could use together so that when you're feeling so sad or you're feeling scared or something has happened, you just come to me and you say it, and I will instantly know that you and I need to sit together and find a way to find the words together. Our choice was to say, I have a stomach ache. And I knew that that child needed extra attention, and there was something really cooking in that child's brain. And we worked through it together. That was from the time this child was in the 3rd or 4th grade. Still now, as an adult, we have that code. So taking responsibility on the good days and the ownership on the good days of your role in your healing, so that on the really bad days, you've got several things in your arsenal to pull from. I have a book. It's orange. My favorite color is orange. And I write in that book the things I'm going to do on the really bad days, because on the really bad days, I don't have the capacity to stop. On the really bad days, I still have deliverables. It might be an afternoon weekend that I could take, naps, but otherwise it's not there. So I have to have my orange notebook that is filled with all the things that I open to and read to know what to do. We have to take responsibility in ourselves and our healing outside of bad days to create the ability to navigate it on the good days and mesh the two together so we propel ourselves to own our healing and own our role in the process.
I love the concept of owning our own healing.
I think, too, what we can do as adults for young people in our lives, a situation with a child that it seemed as if all signs and signals were pointing toward sexual abuse. All the adults in the room, all the smartest people in the room were saying, well, this child loves me. This child loves me. And she knows she can come to me if there's any problem. She would tell me if this was happening to her, because I've told her she can tell me anything. And she would tell me. She's been going to therapy. She would surely tell the therapist if any of this was happening. In those situations, I think it's most vital, the more work I do and the more understanding I have, and I will caveat this, is that I'm not certified or trained in every dynamic as a therapist with people who have been experienced this, but because of my own journey and use the services of people who work directly with sexual assault survivors, we have to give children that kind of tool that they don't have to say the ugly thing that dad or mom or whomever, uncle, friend, babysitter is doing to them. They have to just say, Mom, my stomach hurts, if that's it. But meanwhile, again, all the smartest adults in the room are saying she would certainly tell me if this was happening to her, because we've established trust and we've talked about telling me if someone's hurting. But kids can't say that. So while my child's situation was different, kids still have the inability to really say the things they're scared of and worried about. Like if we create a sign where they come up and they stand next to us and they pull in their left ear, we know, okay, something's bad. We give them tools that allow them to use their voice. We have to teach our children our young people and the people we love, whether they're young or whether they're in college, to say the things that's mutually agreed upon so we know they're hurting in very drastic ways. That's a responsibility of owning our healing too, and then also making sure that we turn around and stop what is our best efforts in every way to stop what is a scourge. I think of all the times I had conversations with young people and I look back that we just didn't give the right message, because how would anybody ever be able to speak those words? It's hard. I walked around for almost 4.5 decades not being able to say those words and thinking I had my shit locked down. I could move past this. 4.5 decades. And I'm not going to say they were lost, but I would have sure have been a different parent. I sure would have been a different lover. I sure would have made different choices in who I accepted as partners. I sure wouldn't have been staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning to prove my worth. I sure would have maybe started giving the same consideration to myself that I gave so many people. We have to take the ownership of ourselves. And again, I'm going to say I am not victim blaming, because things have been thrust upon us without our knowledge, without our consent, and in the most horrific ways, again, at the people most likely who claim to love us.
And thrust upon us without us having knowledge or skill sets of how to handle what's been thrust upon us. I mean, we don't get trained in self-care. We don't get trained in self-compassion. We don't get the knowledge handed to us as we are growing up on how to take care of ourselves if something does happen to us. That's why you have children circling you. It's because they're looking for help from people they do trust. They just don't, like you said, they don't know how to verbalize that.
Yep.
So when you look back, like you just said, and I would have been a different person had I known this, had I known that. We can't be spending a whole lot of time kicking ourselves about what we did or didn't know either, because we just don't have that book of instruction on how to handle these types of situations, especially as children. It's complicated, it's painful, it's difficult, and children don't have that sophistication, that mindset, that capability of even processing a lot of what's going on.
Right. But what I want to play in is the people who have finally decided to choose and use their voice and invested in the wrong person. To those people, I want to say, my darlings, please don't stop using your voice. Find another person. I guarantee you will ultimately find the person. And I know it's hard to repeat your story. Don't let that silence be the last time you use your voice. That comes back to owning our responsibility and our healing. That comes back to helping people find the right words. Right now, we're rebuilding and rebranding everything at Safe and Harm's Way. And I keep bringing us back to, is this trauma informed? And are we actually giving people the verbiage that helps them in the next idea? Because if we don't take into account trauma informed with very simple sentences, people can't even process what they should type in a search bar. So we are now building it on sentences. I am scared and I need help. I don't know how to say what has happened to me. I need to find someone who can help me heal. I need to find safety for myself and my kids. I need to talk to a lawyer. These simple statements that doesn't mean they have to come up with what do I even search for, but say what they're feeling inside, so that we can point them into the right direction of what ultimately could help them. And we'll say, like you're going to see it when we launch it, we are answering the question, how do I get a restraining order? Safe and Harm's Way is now answering the question, how do I decide to start dating again? Safe and Harm's Way is now answering the question, is there a way for me to be more safe? Safe and Harm's Way is asking the question, how do I navigate the court system? So we're answering the question. So we can either do it by people who say, I'm feeling this way, or we can do it by saying, Safe and Harm's Way is answering this question, whatever XYZ question is, for you. So that we can try to engage on every level of where their trauma is to bring them out. Again, one resource until they decide to do the next resource, until they decide to do the next resource, because it is one step at a time. I'll use myself as an example. When I discovered that the person who I was about to marry had secretly spent our entire 8 years together without my knowledge and without my consent, drugging me and allowing other people to rape me, could not have ever believed that was happening. I could tell you there were some things wrong with my body that I couldn't explain. So when I actually discovered it at roughly the same time, there were some things in my body that I couldn't explain. I went to the emergency room and I said, I have found this on his computer. I don't know what to do next. And there's something wrong with my body. And I didn't get a rape kit because I didn't know to ask for a rape kit. And I didn't get a sexual assault nurse educator to come do the exam because I didn't know those things existed. So we can give people tools, and we're going to ask people to ask for those tools when they are most vulnerable. And who can do that? So I'm open to anyone listening to help us answer that question at Safe in Harm's Way.
I say this over and over again, but I'll say it again because I know there's people that haven't ever heard this podcast before, but I'll say that that's what this platform is for. That's why Sexual Assault Survivor Stories exists, is to acknowledge those stories, is to give those people who do have something to say and are willing to say it a voice in a safe place, in a way that they can be understood and find some commonality and some community and some help. And that's what Safe in Harm's Way is doing. I'll tell the world that's why you're here on a monthly basis, is because they need to hear the things that you're talking about and to know that there is a safe place in harm's way.
And for anyone listening to this, know that you're seen and you're valued and you're loved beyond measure. And you're going to have a moment in time where you no longer have to express yourself, where you no longer have to keep silent. And there will be people who believe you.
Carolyn, what's thrilling to me is the passion that you have, the excitement, the power that comes from Safe in Harm's Way. I think we owe you a huge debt of gratitude for sharing your story to begin with, for making public that which the public usually doesn't want to hear about or talk about because it goes against everything that our human psyche says that we should be paying attention to when we start talking about this and normalizing the conversation. But our brains need to hear this stuff to normalize it, to make our own psyches understand that this type of conversation has to exist in order to reduce the prevalence of rape and sexual assault within our society. Carolyn, thanks for everything that you've voiced and laid out for us. It's been amazing, and I'm looking forward to next month. I'm so glad this is a regular part of this show.
I am too. I appreciate your kindness and the extension of including me. You create this, and then you give me this soul fuel for me, and it's soul fuel for anyone else on the journey. And so how you show up in the world and the people you bring on here to give a voice is magic. It's magic.
I hope so. That's the goal. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Keeps me going. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening and a wonderful week. We'll talk again soon.
It's a plan.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SASS podcast. I want to thank each and every one of you again for being part of this milestone 100th episode and sharing in the growth of this podcast. It's an honor to count each one of you as a significant part of SASS. I also want to give a huge shout out to Carolyn Markel, not only for being a guest on this distinctive occasion, but also for all she's accomplished and is continuing to do for victims and survivors of rape, sexual assault, and domestic violence. Thank you, Carolyn. Keep up the great work that you're doing. If you haven't already, please subscribe to and rate this show. I also want to encourage each of you to do your part in helping bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. The best way to do this is to start by believing whenever a victim or survivor is reaching out for help or is telling their rape or sexual assault experience. If you'd like more information on this powerful campaign, go to www.startbybelieving.org. Because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Thank you again for being part of this episode. I look forward to continuing the podcast and having you listen in. We'll see you next week.